Alpha Bodyguard was hired to protect the billionaire CEO daughter for 18 months. He loved her in secret. He broke into her penthouse at 2 in the morning, not to hurt her, but to save her. Riona Caldwell woke to the sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. The kind of silence that feels too thick, too heavy, like the air before a storm breaks. She blinked into the darkness, her mind struggling to catch up with her body, which already knew something was wrong. That's when she saw him.
Reese.
Standing at the foot of her bed, like a shadow carved from stone. 6'7" of muscle and scars, shoulders so broad they blocked out the faint city lights bleeding through her window. His knuckles were split open, blood dripping onto her cream-colored carpet in slow, deliberate drops. His chest heaved like he'd just run a marathon or fought a war. And his eyes. Oh God, his eyes. They glowed amber in the dark. Not a trick of the light. Not her imagination. Actual glowing amber, like something ancient and feral had clawed its way to the surface and refused to go back down. Riona should have screamed. She should have grabbed her phone, dialed 911, thrown something at him. She should have done anything except what she actually did. She sat up slowly, heart hammering against her ribs, and whispered his name. Reese, what happened to your hands? Her voice cracked, not from fear, though there was plenty of that crackling under her skin like static electricity. No, it cracked from something else. Something she didn't have a name for yet. Concern. Confusion. A strange, desperate need to understand why the man who'd been her silent, stone-faced bodyguard for 18 months was standing in her bedroom at 2 a.m., bleeding and glowing and looking at her like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to this earth. Reese didn't answer. He just stood there, chest rising and falling, fists clenched so tight his knuckles had gone white around the blood. His jaw was locked, that sharp, brutal jawline she'd caught herself staring at more times than she'd ever admit. His dark hair was wild, falling into his eyes, and there was something in his expression that made her stomach flip. Not anger, not violence.
Pain.
Raw, unfiltered, soul-deep pain. And that's when Riona realized he'd been fighting someone. For her. The window behind him was shattered. Glass glittered on the floor like diamonds. The curtains fluttered in the cold night breeze. Someone had broken in. Someone had tried to get to her. And Reese had stopped them. Reese, she said again, softer this time, pushing the blankets off her legs. What happened? Who was here? His eyes tracked her movement like a predator watching prey. But there was no threat in it. Just focus. Just intensity so sharp it could cut. Stay in bed, he said. His voice was gravel and smoke, low and rough, the kind of voice that vibrated in your chest and stayed there long after the words faded. Riona ignored him. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, bare feet hitting the cold floor. She was wearing an oversized t-shirt and sleep shorts, nothing that made her feel prepared for whatever the hell was happening right now, but she stood anyway.
Who was it? She demanded.
Are they still here? Did you? They're gone. Gone where? Reese's jaw tightened. His eyes flickered, just for a second, and she saw something wild and dangerous flash across his face. Something that didn't belong on a human. They won't be coming back, he said flatly. Riona's stomach twisted.
She didn't know what that meant.
She wasn't sure she wanted to know, but she couldn't stop staring at his hands. At the blood. At the way his fingers trembled just slightly, like he was holding himself back from something. Like every muscle in his body was coiled tight, ready to spring, and it was taking everything he had not to move. You're hurt, she said, taking a step toward him.
I'm fine.
Reese, you're bleeding. I said I'm fine. His tone was sharp. Final. The kind of tone that would have made anyone else back off. Riona took another step forward. Let me see. Riona. Let me see your hands, Reese. For a moment, he just stared at her. And Riona swore she saw something crack in that impenetrable mask he always wore. Something vulnerable and desperate, and so deeply buried, she almost missed it. Then he exhaled, slow and deliberate, and held out his hands. Riona's breath caught. His knuckles were destroyed. Split skin. Bruised bone. Blood smeared up his wrists and forearms. It looked like he'd punched through concrete. Or claws.
Or teeth.
Jesus, she breathed, reaching for him instinctively. Reese jerked back. Don't. Reese. Don't touch me right now, Riona. The way he said her name, rough and broken and aching, made her freeze. There was something in his voice. Something she'd never heard before. Not in 18 months of him standing behind her at galas, driving her to meetings, hovering in doorways like a silent, watchful ghost.
Fear.
Not of her. Not of whoever had tried to break in. Of himself. Riona's heart twisted. What happened tonight? She asked quietly. Reese closed his eyes. His hands curled into fists again, and she watched the blood well up fresh from the cracks in his skin. Someone tried to kill you. The words hung in the air like smoke. Riona felt the world tilt. What? They got past building security. Past the locks. They were in your apartment, Riona. In your bedroom. Her knees felt weak. She sat down hard on the edge of the bed. How did you? I heard them. From where? You live across the city. Reese opened his eyes. And for the first time since she'd met him, he looked at her like he had nothing left to lose. I wasn't across the city. I was outside your building. Riona blinked. What? I'm always outside your building. The air left her lungs. You what? Reese dragged a hand through his hair, smearing blood across his temple. He looked exhausted. Wrecked. Like a man who'd been carrying a weight too heavy for too long and had finally hit his breaking point. Every night, he said, voice low and rough. Every single night for the last 18 months, I've been outside your building. Watching. Waiting. Making sure you're safe. Riona's heart slammed against her ribs. Why? Reese laughed. It was a dark, broken sound that had no humor in it. Because I'm a fool. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I've got. Riona stood up, closing the distance between them. Reese tensed, every muscle in his body going rigid, but he didn't back away. Tell me the truth, she said softly. Reese looked down at her, and for one reckless, dangerous second, she thought he might actually do it. She thought he might tell her whatever secret he'd been guarding so fiercely, whatever truth lived behind those amber eyes and that brutal, beautiful face. But then his expression shuddered. You should get some sleep, he said, stepping back. I'll stay tonight. Make sure no one else tries anything. Reese. Good night, Riona. He turned and walked out of her bedroom, leaving bloody footprints on the carpet. Riona stood there, trembling, her mind racing. Because she'd just realized something. Reese hadn't been protecting her because it was his job. He'd been protecting her because he couldn't stop. Because something in him, something deeper than duty, stronger than money, fiercer than loyalty, refused to let her go. What Riona didn't know, what she couldn't possibly understand in that moment, standing in her dark bedroom with shattered glass glittering on the floor and her bodyguard's blood staining her carpet. Reese had been in love with her for 8 years. Not 18 months. 8 years. He'd seen her at a charity gala when she was 23, laughing too loud at a joke, champagne sloshing over the rim of her glass. He'd watched her trip over her own feet on the way to the bathroom and catch herself with a graceless stumble and a bright, embarrassed smile. And something in his chest, something he'd thought was dead, had roared to life. He memorized everything about her that night. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. The way she tipped the coat check girl $50. The way she looked at people, really looked at them like they mattered. He fell in love with her in a single moment. And he'd been suffering in silence ever since. He never said a word, never approached her, never let her see him watching. He just existed in her orbit, close enough to protect, far enough not to burn, until Victor Caldwell, Riona's father, one of the most dangerous billionaires in the country, offered him a job. Protect my daughter. 18 months. Name your price. Reese didn't name a price.
He just said yes.
Because for 18 months, he'd get to stand next to her. Even if she never smiled at him the way she smiled at everyone else. Even if she thought he hated her. Even if it killed him slowly, day by day, to be so close and never, ever touch her. But tonight, someone had tried to take her from him. And Reese had torn them apart with his bare hands. Not because it was his job. Because if anything happened to her, he wouldn't survive it. Welcome to Gracie Werewolf Story Bank. This is the story of Reese and Riona, the silent alpha who couldn't speak his love, so he bled it instead. The billionaire's daughter who thought her bodyguard was cold, distant, untouchable. She had no idea he'd been in love with her for 8 years. She had no idea he wasn't entirely human. And she had no idea that the man who just saved her life was about to become the most dangerous thing in it. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. Seriously. We love seeing our communities spread across the globe. If you're watching from New York, London, wherever, let us know. And if you enjoy werewolf stories like this, stories that make your heart race and your chest ache, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on that notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too. Trust me, you're going to want to see where this goes. This is the story of Riona and Riona. And I promise you, by the end, you'll understand why silence can be the loudest confession of all. Because sometimes love doesn't roar. Sometimes it bleeds in the dark. And sometimes the man who says nothing is the one who feels everything. Let's begin. Chapter 1. 18 months ago, everything changed. Not for Riona. For her, it was just another Tuesday. Another meeting with her father in his glass-walled office that overlooked the city like a throne room. Another conversation about security protocols and potential threats and why she needed to take her safety more seriously. Riona hated these meetings. She sat across from Victor Caldwell, her father, though sometimes she wondered if he remembered that, and tried not to roll her eyes as he went through his usual speech. He was a man who commanded empires with a phone call, who made politicians nervous and CEOs sweat. Tall, silver-haired, sharp as a blade. He loved her in his own distant, calculated way, which meant he loved her enough to keep her alive, but not enough to actually know her. "I'm hiring you a bodyguard," Victor said, not looking up from the file on his desk. Riona sighed. "Dad, I already have security. The building has security."
I'm fine.
"You're not fine. You're exposed. There have been 3 credible threats against you in the last 6 months. Credible threats from internet trolls who don't like that I donated to. Riona." Victor finally looked up. His eyes were hard.
Cold.
The eyes of a man who'd seen too much and trusted too little. "This isn't a negotiation. I'm assigning you a personal bodyguard. He starts Monday." Riona crossed her arms. "I don't want a bodyguard following me around like a shadow. I don't care what you want. I care about keeping you alive. I'm 28 years old. I run a multi-million-dollar foundation. I think I can handle myself." Victor leaned back in his chair. "You're competent, Riona. One of the smartest people I know. But you're also reckless. You walk to coffee shops alone. You take the subway. You let strangers get too close. That's called living a normal life, Dad. Normal gets you killed." The conversation was over. Victor Caldwell didn't argue. He declared. And once he declared something, the universe bent to accommodate him. Riona left his office frustrated and annoyed, already dreading Monday. She had no idea that the man her father had hired wasn't just a bodyguard. He was the man who'd been in love with her for 8 years. And he was about to walk into her life and destroy everything she thought she knew about safety, control, and the careful walls she'd built around her heart. Monday morning arrived like a punch to the gut. Riona was running late. She was always running late. Not because she was disorganized, but because she tried to fit 30 hours of work into a 24-hour day. She'd been up until 3 a.m. reviewing grant proposals, collapsed into bed fully clothed, and woke up to her alarm blaring at 6:30 with no memory of falling asleep. She stumbled into her kitchen, hair a mess, wearing pajama shorts and an old college hoodie, and found a man standing in her living room. Riona screamed. The man didn't move. He just stood there, hands clasped in front of him, expression completely neutral. Like her screaming was a mild inconvenience. Like he was carved from stone and noise couldn't touch him. Riona grabbed the first thing within reach, a decorative vase her assistant had given her last Christmas, and held it like a weapon. "Who the hell are you, and how did you get in here?" The man stared at her. He was massive. Not just tall but broad. Built like he'd been designed to break through walls. His shoulders stretched the fabric of his black tactical shirt, and his arms were roped with muscle and scars. Dark hair, sharp jaw, eyes the color of storm clouds. And he was looking at her like she was the only thing in the universe worth looking at. "Reese Cale," he said. His voice was low and rough, the kind of voice that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. "Your father hired me." Riona's brain stuttered. "The bodyguard." "Yes." "You couldn't have called first?"
Knocked?
"Not broken into my apartment like a serial killer?" "Your father gave me a key." "Of course he did." Riona set the vase down and ran a hand through her tangled hair. "This is unbelievable. I don't need a babysitter." Reese didn't respond. He just kept staring at her with that unreadable expression, like he was cataloging every detail of her face and filing it away somewhere important. It made her uncomfortable, not in a threatening way. In a way that felt too intimate, too focused, like he could see straight through her. "Okay, well, I'm going to get dressed," Riona said, gesturing vaguely toward her bedroom. "You can stand there and be terrifying, I guess." She turned and walked away, feeling his eyes on her the entire time. What Riona didn't see was the way Reese's jaw tightened. The way his hands clenched into fists the moment she disappeared into her bedroom. The way he closed his eyes and exhaled slowly, like he was trying to steady himself. Because seeing her in person, not from across a crowded room, not through a telephoto lens, not in his memory, was almost too much. She was more beautiful than he remembered. Messy and real and human in a way that made his chest ache. And she had no idea who he was. No idea that he'd seen her at a charity gala 8 years ago and fallen so hard it rewired his brain. No idea that he'd turned down 6-figure contracts just to take this job. No idea that standing in her living room, surrounded by her scent and her chaos and her life, was the closest thing to heaven he'd ever known. Reese opened his eyes and stared at the closed bedroom door. 18 months. He could survive 18 months. He'd survived 8 years of wanting her from a distance. 18 months of being close would either save him or destroy him. He wasn't sure which one he was hoping for. The first week was hell. Not because Riona was difficult. She wasn't. She was busy, driven, constantly moving from meeting to meeting, call to call, event to event. She ran her foundation like a general commanding an army, and Reese had to admit, grudgingly, silently, that she was damn good at it. No, the first week was hell, because Reese had to be close to her without touching her. He stood behind her during board meetings, drove her to site visits, waited outside coffee shops while she grabbed her morning latte. He memorized her routines, her habits, the way she hummed under her breath when she was thinking. And he stayed silent. Because that's what he did. That's what he'd always done. Riona, for her part, tried to engage him. She asked him questions. "Where are you from? How long have you been doing this? Do you ever smile?" Reese answered in single syllables or not at all. It frustrated her. He could see it in the way her jaw tightened, the way she'd glance at him in the rearview mirror like she was trying to figure him out.
Good, he thought.
Let her be frustrated. Let her think he was cold, unfeeling, detached. It was safer that way. Because if she knew the truth, if she knew that every time she laughed, his heart stopped, that every time she got too close, his wolf snarled and begged him to pull her closer, that he spent his nights lying awake imagining what it would feel like to hear her say his name like it mattered, she'd run. And Reese couldn't let her run. Not when he'd finally gotten close enough to protect her. But Riona wasn't the type to let things go. 2 weeks in, she cornered him. They were in her penthouse. She'd just gotten home from a donor dinner, heels kicked off by the door, dress wrinkled, makeup smudged. She looked exhausted and beautiful, and Reese had to physically stop himself from reaching out to steady her when she swayed on her feet. "Okay," she said, turning to face him. "We need to talk." Reese's stomach dropped.
About what? About this.
She gestured between them. "This weird, silent, brooding thing you've got going on. I get that you're here to protect me. I respect that. But you can't just stand there like a statue and never say anything. It's creepy." Reese's jaw tightened. "I'm doing my job. Your job doesn't require you to pretend I don't exist. I'm not pretending you don't exist. Then what are you doing?" Reese stared at her. And for one dangerous second, he almost told her, "I'm trying not to fall apart every time you look at me. I'm trying to keep my wolf from ripping through my skin and claiming you in front of the entire world. I'm trying to survive being this close to you without destroying everything." Instead, he said, "I'm keeping you safe." Riona laughed. It was a bitter, frustrated sound. "You know what?
Fine. Keep your secrets.
Be the silent, mysterious bodyguard. I don't care anymore." She turned and walked toward her bedroom. Reese watched her go, fists clenched, every muscle in his body screaming at him to follow her, to explain, to tell her the truth. But he didn't.
Bika.
Use the truth would ruin her. And Reese would rather suffer in silence for the rest of his life than see her hurt. 3 months in, Riona started testing him. She'd ask him random questions just to see if he'd answer. Favorite color? Favorite food? Ever been in love? Reese answered the first 2. Ignored the third. She'd trip on purpose, small stumbles, barely noticeable, just to see if he'd catch her. He always did. His reflexes were too fast, his awareness too sharp. Every time she stumbled, his hand shot out, steadying her before she even realized she was falling. And every time he touched her, even through fabric, even for a fraction of a second, it felt like lightning. Riona felt it too. He could see it in the way her breath hitched, the way her eyes widened just slightly before she pulled away. But she never said anything. And neither did he. 6 months in, everything changed. They were at a gallery opening. One of those pretentious events where rich people pretended to understand art while drinking overpriced champagne. Riona hated them, but she attended because her foundation sponsored the artist. She was wearing a black dress that made Reese's brain short-circuit.
Simple.
Elegant. Devastating. He stood in the corner, watching her navigate the crowd with practiced ease. She smiled, laughed, shook hands.
She was good at this.
At pretending she belonged in this world of wealth and excess. But Reese knew better. He saw the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. The way she checked her watch when she thought no one was looking. The way she gravitating toward the exit every 20 minutes like she was calculating her escape. Halfway through the night, she drank too much champagne. Not sloppy drunk. Just tipsy enough to be bold. She found Reese in his corner and walked straight up to him, heels clicking on the marble floor. "Dance with me," she said. Reese stiffened. "I don't dance." "Everyone dances." "I don't." Riona tilted her head, studying him. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright. She looked happy and sad and reckless all at once. "You don't like me very much, do you, Reese?" The question hit him like a bullet. Reese stared at her, and he realized she actually believed it. She actually thought he didn't like her. He wanted to laugh. He wanted to scream. He wanted to grab her by the shoulders and tell her that he liked her so much it was killing him. That he'd been in love with her for 8 years. That every time she smiled at someone else, he wanted to tear the world apart. Instead, he said nothing. Just stared at her with those storm gray eyes, jaw tight, fists clenched at his sides. Riona laughed. It was a sad, resigned sound.
"Yeah.
That's what I thought." She turned and walked away. And Reese stood there, watching her disappear into the crowd, feeling like he'd just lost something he never had in the first place. That night, alone in his apartment, Reese punched a hole through his wall. Because the truth was killing him. He didn't just like her. He worshipped her. And he was running out of time to tell her. Chapter 2. Riona couldn't stop thinking about that night. About the way Reese had looked at her in the dim kitchen light, shirtless and bleeding and so utterly vulnerable it had stolen the breath from her lungs. About the way his voice had cracked when he said those words. Because if I start, I won't be able to stop, like he was confessing something dangerous. She replayed it over and over in her mind during meetings, during calls, during the endless hours she spent pretending to focus on grant proposals when all she could think about was the rough warmth of his skin under her fingertips as she'd stitched that wound closed. Reese had scars everywhere.
She'd noticed that.
Thin white lines across his shoulders, a jagged one that disappeared beneath his collarbone, another that curved along his ribs like someone had tried to gut him and barely missed.
She wanted to ask about them.
Wanted to know where they came from, what kind of life he'd lived before walking into hers. But she didn't, because asking felt too intimate, too much like admitting she cared. And Riona wasn't ready to admit that yet, even though she absolutely did. 7 months in, the coffee incident happened. Riona was running late for a meeting with the mayor's office. Not fashionably late. Actually late. The kind of late that meant she'd have to grovel and apologize and promise it would never happen again, even though it definitely would because her schedule was a nightmare and she was drowning in deadlines. She was juggling her phone. 3 unread texts from her assistant, 2 missed calls from her father, 1 passive-aggressive email from a board member, her purse, a stack of folders she absolutely needed for the presentation, and a latte the size of her head because she'd been awake since 4 a.m. and caffeine was the only thing keeping her upright. Reese was already in the driver's seat of the black SUV, waiting. Silent as always. Patient as always. Watching her through the windshield with that unreadable expression that made her want to throw something at him just to get a reaction. Riona power-walked toward the car, heels clicking on the pavement, mentally rehearsing her apology to the mayor's chief of staff. She didn't see the uneven crack in the sidewalk. Her heel caught. Her ankle twisted. And suddenly she was falling, folders scattering, phone tumbling, latte launching into the air like a caffeinated missile. Riona's brain had just enough time to think, oh no, oh no, oh no before. Reese was there. She didn't see him get out of the car. Didn't hear the door open. 1 second he was behind the wheel, the next he was in front of her, moving faster than any human should be able to move. He caught the latte midair with his left hand, didn't even look at it, just snatched it out of the air like it was nothing, and his right hand locked around her waist, steadying her before she hit the ground. Riona gasped. Time seemed to slow down. She was pressed against his chest, his arm wrapped around her waist, his hand splayed across her ribs. She could feel the heat of him through her blouse, the solid wall of muscle beneath his shirt, the way his heart was pounding against her shoulder. Or maybe that was her heart. She couldn't tell anymore. Riona looked up. Reese was staring down at her, jaw tight, eyes dark and intense, and so focused it made her dizzy. His pupils were blown wide, almost swallowing the gray, and there was something wild flickering behind them. Something that didn't quite look human. For a moment, neither of them moved. The city sounds faded, traffic, construction, voices, until all Riona could hear was her own ragged breathing and the thundering of her pulse in her ears. You have really fast reflexes, she whispered. Reese's jaw clenched. His hand flexed against her waist, fingers pressing in just slightly, and Riona felt heat bloom across her skin. She watched his throat work as he swallowed, watched the muscle in his jaw jump, watched something crack in his expression, just for a second, just a flash, before he locked it down again. He straightened her gently, made sure she was steady on her feet, and handed her the latte without a word. Then he stepped back, turned around, walked back to the car like nothing had happened. Riona stood there on the sidewalk, flustered and confused and suddenly very aware that her skin was still tingling where he'd touched her. She bent down to gather her scattered folders, hands shaking slightly, and tried to make sense of what had just happened. Because that look in his eyes? That wasn't indifference. That wasn't cold professionalism. That was something else entirely. Something that made her stomach flip and her breath catch, and her brain scream danger, 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 even as every other part of her leaned toward him like a flower toward sunlight. Riona climbed into the car, still rattled, and glanced at Reese in the rearview mirror. He was staring straight ahead, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles had gone white. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for catching me." Reese didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge she'd spoken. But Riona saw the way his jaw tightened, and she realized something that made her chest ache. Reese wasn't cold. He was holding himself back.
From what she didn't know.
But she was going to find out. That night, Riona couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over. The way his hand had felt on her waist. The way he'd looked at her like she was precious and breakable and the only thing in the world that mattered. The way he'd walked away like it hurt him to do it. At 2 a.m., she gave up on sleep. She threw on an oversized t-shirt and padded into the kitchen for water, fully expecting the penthouse to be dark and silent. Instead, she found Reese sitting at the counter, shirtless, stitching up a gash on his forearm with the kind of calm, methodical focus most people reserved for tying their shoes. Riona froze in the doorway. Blood dripped onto the white marble counter in slow, steady drops. The wound was deep. She could see muscle and tissue beneath the torn skin, and Reese was just handling it. Like it was an inconvenience. Like pain was something that happened to other people. What happened? The words came out sharper than she intended, edged with panic. Reese didn't look up. Nothing. That's not nothing, Reese. You're bleeding.
I'm aware.
What happened? She demanded again, moving closer. Patrol. Ran into some trouble. It's handled. Patrol?
What are you talking about?
You're supposed to be off duty. You're supposed to be. I'm never off duty.
His voice was flat.
Final. Riona's stomach twisted. She watched him push the needle through his skin without even flinching, and something inside her cracked. Stop, she said, walking over and grabbing the first aid kit from the cabinet. Just stop. Let me help. I'm fine. You're clearly not fine. You're sitting in my kitchen at 2 a.m. stitching yourself up like some kind of... She cut herself off, not sure how to finish that sentence. Reese finally looked at her, and the exhaustion in his eyes made her chest ache. I've done this 100 times, Riona. I don't need help. I don't care. She sat down next to him, pulled the needle out of his hand, and ignored the way he tensed. Let me help, she said again, softer this time. For a long moment, Reese just stared at her. Like he was trying to figure out if she was real, or if he'd finally cracked and started hallucinating. Then he exhaled slowly, and held out his arm. Riona's hands trembled as she cleaned the wound. She'd never been good with blood, but she forced herself to focus.
To breathe.
To ignore the way Reese was watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. The wound was worse up close. Deep and jagged, like something with claws had torn through his skin. What did this? She whispered, threading the needle. Doesn't matter. It does to me. Reese's jaw tightened. You don't want to know. Try me. He didn't answer. Riona started stitching, trying to keep her hands steady. She could feel his eyes on her face, tracking every movement, every breath. It was unnerving and oddly intimate, like they were the only two people in the world and the rest of reality had faded away. Why do you do this? She asked quietly, focusing on the needle. Put yourself in danger like this. It's my job.
No.
Your job is to stand next to me at events and drive me to meetings. Your job isn't to get torn apart by whatever did this. Reese was silent for a long moment. Then, so quietly she almost missed it. Some things are worth bleeding for. Riona's hands stilled. She looked up and found him already staring at her, eyes dark and unreadable and so full of something she couldn't name that it made her heart stutter. Like what? She whispered. Reese closed his eyes. His jaw worked like he was trying to swallow words that were clawing their way up his throat. Reese, she said softly.
Talk to me.
Please. I can't. Why not? Because if I start, I won't be able to stop. The words hung between them like smoke. Riona's breath caught. She finished the last stitch in silence, tied it off, and set the needle down with shaking hands.
There, she said.
All done. Reese opened his eyes and looked down at his arm. At the neat row of stitches. At her hands still resting gently against his skin. "Thank you," he said roughly. Riona didn't move. "Why won't you talk to me, Reese? What are you so afraid of?" "I'm not afraid." "Liar." His eyes snapped to hers. And for one wild, reckless second, Riona thought he might actually tell her the truth. She thought he might finally let her see whatever he'd been guarding so fiercely, whatever lived beneath that brutal, beautiful exterior. But then he pulled his arm back, stood up, and put distance between them like she'd burned him. "You should get some sleep," he said, voice flat. Controlled. "You have a breakfast meeting at 7. Reese. "Good night, Riona." He walked out of the kitchen, leaving her sitting there alone, surrounded by bloodstained gauze and the echo of words he hadn't said. Riona sat there for a long time, staring at the counter, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Because she'd felt it. That crack in his armor. That moment where he'd almost let her in. And she realized something that terrified her. Reese wasn't cold. He wasn't distant. He was holding himself back with everything he had. Like touching her would break something inside him he couldn't fix. Like wanting her was dangerous.
And Riona?
She was starting to want him too. The next morning, everything was different. Not because anything had changed externally. The routine was the same. Reese drove her to her breakfast meeting, stood silently in the corner while she talked strategy with donors, waited by the car while she grabbed her afternoon coffee. But the energy between them had shifted. Riona caught herself watching him, studying the line of his jaw, the breadth of his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the steering wheel like he was holding onto control by a thread. And every time she looked at him, she found him already looking at her. Their eyes would meet in the rearview mirror, and something electric would arc between them, sharp and dangerous, and impossible to ignore. Riona started testing him. Small things. Harmless things. She'd ask him random questions just to see if he'd answer. "What's your favorite color? Do you have family? Have you ever been in love?" Reese answered the first two in monosyllables. Ignored the third completely. She'd trip on purpose, little stumbles, barely noticeable. Just to see if he'd catch her. He always did. Every single time. His reflexes were inhuman. The second she swayed, his hand shot out, steadying her with a touch that was gentle and firm and over too quickly. And every time he touched her, Riona felt it. That spark. That heat. That thing that made her breath hitch and her pulse race and her brain go fuzzy. She knew he felt it too. She could see it in the way his jaw tightened, the way his pupils dilated, the way he pulled away like she'd electrocuted him. But he never said anything. And neither did she. Because neither of them knew how to cross that line without burning everything down. 8 months in, Riona made a decision. She was done pretending. Done ignoring the tension that crackled between them like a live wire. Done pretending she didn't feel something for the silent, scarred man who stood between her and the world like a fortress made of flesh and bone. They were in the car after another charity gala. Riona had kicked off her heels and was rubbing her aching feet, exhausted and tipsy and bold in the way that only wine and frustration could make a person.
"Reese," she said.
He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Yes." "Do you like me?" His hands tightened on the wheel.
"What?"
"Do you like me?" "As a person. Not as a job. Not as an assignment. As a person." Silence. Riona leaned forward, resting her arms on the back of his seat. "Because sometimes I think you do. Sometimes I think you look at me like I'm the only person in the world. And then you pull away, and I think maybe I imagined it." "Riona, do you hate me?" "No." "Then what is it? Why won't you just talk to me like a normal person?" Reese pulled the car over. Riona's heart jumped. He turned around in his seat, and the look in his eyes made her forget how to breathe. "You want to know why I don't talk to you?" His voice was rough.
Raw.
"Because every time you smile, I lose the ability to think. Every time you laugh, my chest feels like it's caving in. Every time you get close to me, I have to fight every instinct I have not to." He stopped himself. Riona's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it. Not to what? Reese closed his eyes. This was a mistake. What was? Taking this job. Being this close to you. Pretending I could handle it. Handle what? He looked at her.
And Riona saw it.
Everything he'd been hiding. The longing.
The pain.
The desperate, aching want that lived in his eyes like a living thing. You, he said simply. Riona's world tilted. What are you saying? Reese turned back around, gripping the steering wheel so tight she thought it might snap. Nothing. Forget I said anything. Reese. We're almost home. He pulled back onto the road. And Riona sat there, heart racing, mind spinning, trying to process what had just happened. Because Reese had almost told her. Almost confessed whatever secret he'd been carrying. And Riona realized, with startling clarity, that she wanted him to. She wanted to know why he looked at her like she hung the stars. Why he bled for her in the shadows. Why he was holding himself back with so much force it was killing him. Because whatever was happening between them, it wasn't one-sided. And Riona was done pretending it was. Chapter 3. Riona started paying attention after that night. Really paying attention. Not the casual observation she'd been doing for months, the half-distracted awareness of a person trying to convince herself she wasn't falling for her bodyguard. No, this was different. This was deliberate. Focused. The kind of attention you pay when you realize you've been missing something crucial right in front of your face. She noticed everything. The way Reese positioned himself in every room they entered. Always between her and the door. Always with his back to the wall. Always scanning, calculating, assessing threats she couldn't even see. The way he memorized details about her life that no one else bothered to remember. Her coffee order, oat milk latte, extra shot, light foam. Her favorite lunch spot, the Italian place on 5th with the outdoor seating. The names of her assistant, her best friend, the doorman at her building. The way she twisted her ring when she was nervous. The way she tapped her pen during boring meetings. The exact angle she tilted her head when she was really listening to Psalm 1. He knew her, in a way no one else did, and that terrified her almost as much as it thrilled her. But the thing that really got to Riona, the thing that kept her awake at night, staring at her ceiling, trying to make sense of the man who'd walked into her life and turned everything upside down, was the way he flinched when she got too close. Not away from her. Toward her. Like every instinct in his body was screaming at him to close the distance, to touch her, to pull her closer. And he was fighting it with everything he had. Like touching her would burn him, or break him, or both. 9 months in, Riona had the worst day of her professional life. The board meeting was brutal. 6 hours of old men in expensive suits questioning her competence, her judgment, her right to run the foundation her father had built. They didn't say it outright, they were too smart for that, but the subtext was clear. You're too young, too soft, too female. You don't belong here. Riona held it together through the entire meeting, smiled, answered their questions with data and logic and calm professionalism, defended every decision, every dollar spent, every program launched. She didn't cry until she got to the car. The second the door closed behind her, something inside her cracked. The tears came fast and furious, messy and ugly and completely beyond her control. She pressed her hands to her face, trying to muffle the sound, trying to hold herself together, but it was useless. She was falling apart, and she hated it. Hated that they'd gotten to her. Hated that she'd let them make her feel small and incompetent and not enough. The driver's side door opened. Closed. Then Reese was there, kneeling on the pavement beside her open door, his massive frame somehow folding itself down to her level. What happened? His voice was rough.
Urgent.
Threaded with something that sounded almost like panic. Riona laughed through her tears. It came out choked and broken. Nothing. I'm fine. I'm just tired. Tired of pretending I have it all together when I clearly don't. Riona. They're right, you know. The board. I'm 28 years old running a foundation I never asked for, making decisions that affect thousands of people, and half the time I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm faking it. All of it. And today they saw right through me. That's not true. You don't know that. Yes, I do. The certainty in his voice made her look up. Heiress was staring at her with an intensity that stole the breath from her lungs. His jaw was tight, his eyes dark and fierce, and there was something in his expression that looked almost like rage. Not at her. For her. You're the most competent person I've ever met, he said, voice low and rough. You work harder than anyone on that board. You care more. You give more. And they know it. That's why they're threatened by you. Riona's chest tightened. Heiress. He reached out, hesitated for just a fraction of a second, like he was fighting himself, and then gently brushed a tear off her cheek with his thumb. His hand was rough,
Scarred.
calloused from years of violence and survival. But his touch? So gentle it made her breath hitch. So careful, like she was something precious he was afraid of breaking. You don't have to pretend with me, he said quietly. You don't have to be strong all the time. Not with me. Riona stared at him. Something shifted in her chest. Something warm and terrifying and so overwhelming she didn't know what to do with it. Why are you so good to me, Heiress? The question hung between them. Heiress's hand froze against her cheek. She watched his throat work as he swallowed, watched the muscle in his jaw jump, watched something crack in his eyes before he locked it down again. He pulled his hand back, like she'd slapped him. It's my job. Bullshit. The word came out sharper than she intended, edged with frustration and tears and 8 months of confusion. Heiress's jaw clenched. His hands curled into fists at his sides. Riona leaned forward, closing the distance between them. Tell me the truth. Why do you do this? Why do you care so much? Riona, don't. Just tell me. Please. And for one reckless, stupid, beautiful second, Heiress almost did. She saw it in his eyes. The words clawing their way up his throat. The confession that had been eating him alive for 8 years. The truth he'd been guarding like his life depended on it. He opened his mouth. And his phone buzzed. The moment shattered. Heiress pulled his phone out, glanced at the screen, and went completely still. All the color drained from his face. What? Riona asked, alarm spiking through her. What is it? Heiress's eyes snapped to hers. And for the first time since she'd met him, she saw fear. Real, raw, bone-deep fear. Get in a car, he said, voice tight.
Now.
What's happening? Riona. Get in the car. Now. The command in his voice made her move without thinking. She slid back into her seat, heart pounding, and Heiress slammed the door. He was in the driver's seat in seconds, engine roaring to life, pulling into traffic with a speed that made her grab the door handle. Heiress, you're scaring me. What's going on? He didn't answer. Just drove. Jaw clenched, eyes scanning the mirrors constantly. Riona pulled out her phone. I'm calling my father. Don't. What? Don't call anyone. Don't text anyone. Just trust me. Please. There was something in his voice. Something desperate and fierce and so unlike the calm, controlled man she'd known for 9 months that it made her chest tighten. She put her phone away.
Okay.
I trust you. Heiress's hands tightened on the wheel. She saw his knuckles go white. They drove in silence for 20 minutes. Through the city, out of the city, into neighborhoods Riona didn't recognize, getting darker and emptier with every turn. Finally, Heiress pulled into the underground parking garage of her building and killed the engine. He sat there for a long moment, staring straight ahead, breathing hard. Heiress. Someone's been watching you, he said quietly. For weeks, maybe longer. Riona's blood went cold. What? Your father's security team picked up on it 3 days ago. Cameras.
Surveillance.
Someone tracking your movements, your routine, your schedule.
Who?
Heiress's jaw clenched. We don't know yet. But whoever it is, they're professional. Careful. And they're getting closer. Riona's hands started shaking. Are you saying someone's trying to? I'm saying until we figure out who's targeting you and why, I'm not leaving your side. Not for a second. But you already.
No.
He turned to look at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her forget how to breathe. I mean, I'm moving into your penthouse. I'm not going home at night. I'm not giving whoever this is a window to get to you. Reese, you can't just. I can. And I am. My father already approved it. This came from him, Riona. The threat is real. Her chest felt tight. Her mind was racing. Someone was watching her, hunting her, and she hadn't even known. Hey. Reese's voice softened. Look at me. Riona met his eyes. Nothing is going to happen to you. I won't let it. Do you understand? The certainty in his voice, the absolute, unwavering conviction, made something in her chest crack open. Okay, she whispered. They went upstairs in silence. Riona unlocked her penthouse with shaking hands and stepped inside, suddenly seeing her home through different eyes. The big windows. The exposed balcony. The door that suddenly felt far too flimsy. Reese moved through the space like a predator. Checking locks. Testing windows. Examining sight lines. Riona watched him from the kitchen, arms wrapped around herself, trying to process everything. You can take the guest room, she said quietly. Reese glanced at her. I'll sleep on the couch. The guest room has an actual bed. I need to be able to see the front door. The couch works. Riona wanted to argue, but she could see in his expression that it wouldn't matter. Reese had already made up his mind. Okay, she said. She turned to head to her bedroom, then stopped. Reese. Yeah. Thank you. For keeping me safe. He didn't respond. Just looked at her with those storm gray eyes, jaw tight, something unreadable flickering across his face. Riona went to bed. She didn't sleep, because she could feel him. Even through the walls, even from the other room. She could feel his presence in her space, solid and watchful and so overwhelming she couldn't think about anything else. Around midnight, she heard him moving. Footsteps. Quiet. Controlled. She got up and padded to her bedroom door, opening it just a crack. Reese was doing a perimeter check, moving through her penthouse with silent, lethal grace. Testing the windows again. Checking the locks. Standing on her balcony. Scanning the street below. He was shirtless. Riona's breath caught. She'd seen him without a shirt before, that night in the kitchen, stitching himself up. But this was different. This was deliberate. Unguarded. His body was a map of violence. Scars everywhere. Old and new, thin and thick, some faded to silver, others still angry and red. There was a massive one across his shoulder blade that looked like something had tried to tear him apart. Another that curved around his ribs. Claw marks on his back. What kind of life had he lived? What had he survived? Reese turned suddenly, like he'd sensed her watching. Their eyes met across the dark apartment. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Reese crossed the space between them in 4 long strides. He stopped just outside her doorway, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off his skin, close enough to see the way his chest rose and fell with each breath. You should be sleeping, he said, voice rough. So should you. Can't. Why not? His jaw tightened. Because if I close my eyes, I can't protect you. Riona's heart twisted. You can't stay awake forever, Reese. Watch me. She studied his face. The exhaustion carved into every line. The shadows under his eyes. The tension vibrating through his entire body. When was the last time you slept? She asked softly. Doesn't matter. Reese.
I'm fine, Riona.
Go back to bed.
No.
His eyes snapped to hers. What? I'm not going back to bed until you tell me what's really going on. And don't say it's just about the threat, because I know there's more to this. There's been more to this for months. Reese closed his eyes. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. Please, Riona whispered. Just talk to me. Tell me the truth. You don't want the truth. Yes, I do.
No.
You really don't. Try me. Reese opened his eyes. And the look in them, desperate and fierce and so full of longing it made her chest ache, nearly broke her. If I tell you, he said quietly, everything changes. You'll never look at me the same way again. Maybe I want things to change. His breath hitched. Riona stepped closer, until she was standing in the doorway, inches from him, so close she could feel the heat of his skin and smell his scent, cedar and smoke and something wild she couldn't name. "Tell me," she said again. And Heiress, exhausted, desperate, fighting a battle he'd been losing for 8 years, finally cracked. "I've been in love with you since the moment I saw you." The words hung in the air between them like a confession and a condemnation all at once. Riona's world tilted. "What?" 8 years ago. Charity gala. You were wearing a blue dress and laughing too loud, and you tripped over your own feet walking to the bathroom. His voice was rough, raw, like the words were being torn out of him. "And I fell in love with you right there. In the middle of a crowded room surrounded by people I didn't know. I saw you, and something in me just knew." Riona couldn't breathe. "I memorized everything about you that night. The way you smiled. The way you looked at people like they mattered. The way you tipped the coat check girl $50 because she looked tired." He laughed, dark and broken. "I fell so hard I couldn't see straight. And I've been in love with you ever since. But you never said anything. You never. Because men like me don't get women like you." His voice cracked. "Because I'm not good enough for you. Because loving you from a distance was better than not having you in my life at all." Tears burned Riona's eyes. "And when your father offered me this job," Heiress continued, "I said yes immediately. Not for the money. Not for my career. Because it meant I got 18 months near you. 18 months of standing next to you and pretending my heart wasn't shattering every time you smiled at someone else. Heiress. And now someone's trying to hurt you. Someone's hunting you. And the thought of losing you," his voice broke completely. I can't lose you, Riona. I won't survive it." Riona reached up and cupped his face. Heiress froze. "You're not going to lose me," she whispered. "You don't know that." "Yes, I do. Because I'm not going anywhere. And neither are you." She pulled him down and kissed him. And Heiress, the silent, controlled man who'd spent 8 years holding himself back, shattered. Chapter 4. Living with Heiress was weird. Not bad weird. Not uncomfortable weird. Just intense in a way Riona hadn't anticipated. He was everywhere. In the kitchen at 5 a.m., making coffee in the dark like some kind of caffeine-brewing ghost. In the living room doing push-ups shirtless at 6, muscles flexing and shifting under scarred skin while she tried very hard to focus on her morning emails and failed spectacularly. In the hallway when she came out of the shower, always positioned between her bedroom and the front door, always alert, always watching. He cooked. Full meals. Not takeout or frozen dinners or the sad desk salads Riona had been surviving on for years. Actual food. Eggs and bacon in the morning. Grilled chicken and vegetables for dinner. He even made her lunch to take to meetings, sandwiches wrapped in parchment paper with a bottle of water and an apple like she was a kid going to school. It was sweet, domestic, completely surreal. He cleaned. Not obsessively, but efficiently. Dishes washed and put away. Counters wiped down. That persistent coffee ring on the table she'd been ignoring for 3 months?
Gone.
He even fixed things she didn't know were broken. The loose cabinet hinge. The squeaky bedroom door. The window that never quite closed all the way. And he never invaded her space. Not really. Except he was always there. Watching. Waiting. A constant presence that filled every room he occupied like smoke. It should have felt suffocating. Instead, it felt safe. Riona had lived alone for 6 years. She valued her independence, her privacy, her ability to walk around her own apartment in ratty pajamas eating cereal over the sink at midnight without judgment. But having Heiress there? She didn't hate it, which terrified her almost as much as the kiss. They hadn't talked about the kiss. The confession had happened 3 nights ago, Heiress admitting he'd been in love with her for 8 years, Riona pulling him down and kissing him like her life depended on it, and then the moment had shattered. Heiress had pulled away, breathing hard, eyes wild, and said something about needing to check the perimeter before disappearing for 2 hours. When he came back, his walls were up again. Not as high as before. Not impenetrable.
But there.
And Riona didn't know how to tear them down without breaking both of them in the process. The first morning after he moved in, Riona walked into the kitchen in her pajamas. An oversized t-shirt that hung off one shoulder and sleep shorts that barely qualified as clothing, hair a mess, eyes half closed, desperately in need of coffee. She stopped dead in the doorway. Heiress was standing at the stove, cooking eggs and bacon, fully dressed in tactical pants and a black t-shirt that clung to him like a second skin. His hair was still damp from the shower. He smelled like soap and coffee and something else. Something cedar dark and wild that made her stomach flip. He turned when she walked in. Froze completely. His eyes tracked over her. The messy hair, the oversized shirt, the bare legs, and something dark and hungry flashed across his face before he locked it down. Morning, Riona mumbled, heading straight for the coffee pot. Heiress turned back to the stove without a word. Riona poured herself coffee, added way too much sugar, and sat at the counter to watch him cook. He moved with the same efficient grace he brought to everything.
No wastid motion. No hesitation.
Like he'd done this 1,000 times. You know, Riona said, wrapping her hands around her mug. You don't have to cook for me. I know, but you do it anyway. Heiress didn't answer. Just plated the eggs and bacon and slid the dish across the counter to her. Riona picked up her fork, studying him. Are you always this chatty in the morning? His lips twitched. Almost a smile. Riona's heart did a stupid little flip in her chest. There it is, she said softly. Heiress's eyes flicked to hers.
What?
A smile. Or the ghost of one, anyway. I don't smile. You just did. Did not. Did too. And just like that, something shifted. The tension that had been crackling between them since the kiss eased just slightly.
Not gone.
Just softer. Riona ate her breakfast, while Heiress cleaned the kitchen with the same methodical focus he brought to everything. She watched him move, cataloging details she'd never noticed before. The way he favored his left side slightly, like his right ribs hurt. The scar that curved along his collarbone and disappeared under his shirt. The tattoo on his forearm, some kind of symbol she didn't recognize, all sharp lines and geometric patterns that looked tribal. What does it mean? She asked, nodding toward his arm. Heiress glanced down at the tattoo.
His jaw tightened.
It's pack markings. Pack. He didn't answer. Riona frowned. Heiress, you should get dressed. You have a meeting at 9. Subject closed. Riona wanted to push. Wanted to demand answers to the 1,000 questions spinning through her head. But she didn't. Because Heiress had just given her something. A tiny piece of information. And pushing too hard would make him shut down completely. So she finished her breakfast, rinsed her plate, and went to get ready. The whole time, she felt his eyes on her. Living with Heiress meant learning his routines. He woke up at 4:30 every morning. Did a perimeter check of the building. Worked out for an hour, push-ups, pull-ups, some kind of martial arts training that looked brutal and beautiful all at once. Showered, made coffee, made breakfast. All before Riona even opened her eyes. He was always awake before her. Always asleep after her. She'd stumble to bed at midnight after working late and find him still on the couch, alert and watchful, eyes tracking her movement across the apartment. Do you ever sleep? She asked one night, pausing in the hallway. Sometimes. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting. Riona sighed. A. And D went to bed. But she started noticing things. The shadows under his eyes getting darker. The way his movements were just slightly slower by the end of the day. The tension that never quite left his shoulders. He was exhausted, running himself into the ground trying to protect her. And Riona didn't know how to make him stop. For days in, Riona tried to cook dinner.
Keyword, tried.
She decided that if Heiress was going to feed her every day, the least she could do was return the favor. She pulled up a recipe on her phone, pasta carbonara, looked simple enough, and got to work. 15 minutes later, the kitchen was a disaster zone. The pasta was burned to the bottom of the pot. The smoke alarm was shrieking. The bacon was somehow both raw and charred. And Riona was pretty sure she'd violated several laws of thermodynamics in the process. Shit, 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 she muttered, waving a dish towel at the smoke detector. The front door slammed open. Heiress burst into the apartment, gun drawn, eyes wild, moving with that inhuman speed she'd seen before. What happened? He barked, scanning the space for threats. Riona froze, dish towel still in hand. I tried to make dinner? Heiress stared at her. Then at the smoking pot. Then at the ruined bacon. He holstered his gun, walked into the kitchen, looked at the carnage, and then did something Riona had never seen him do. He laughed. It was quiet, brief. Just a low chuckle that rumbled in his chest. But it was real. It's not funny, Riona protested, but she was grinning. I was trying to be helpful. You nearly burned down the apartment. I was following the recipe. The recipe didn't say to carbonize everything? Are you making fun of me right now? Heiress's eyes crinkled at the corners. Maybe. Riona threw the dish towel at him. He caught it without looking. Then he gently, physically, moved her out of the kitchen. His hands on her shoulders, warm and steady, guiding her to the counter. Sit, he said. Heiress.
Seat.
Riona sat. She watched him salvage what he could and start over, moving through her destroyed kitchen with the same calm efficiency he brought to everything. I'm a disaster, she said quietly. Heiress paused, looked at her over his shoulder. You're not a disaster. I just tried to burn down my own apartment making pasta. You're just not a cook. That's a nice way of saying I'm hopeless in the kitchen. Heiress turned around, leaning against the counter, studying her with those storm-gray eyes. You're brilliant at everything else. You run a multi-million-dollar foundation. You change lives every day. You work harder than anyone I've ever met.
So, what if you can't cook?
It doesn't make you a disaster. Then what am I? The question hung between them. Heiress held her gaze for a long moment. And when he spoke, his voice was rough and quiet and absolutely certain. Perfect. Riona's breath caught. The words settled over her like a touch. She wanted to respond, wanted to tell him he was wrong, that she was anything but perfect, that she was a mess held together by caffeine and stubbornness and sheer force of will. But the way he was looking at her, like she was something precious and rare and worth protecting, stole every word from her throat. Heiress turned away before she could find them again, and Riona sat there, heart pounding, realizing with startling clarity that she was falling for him, had been falling for him, was maybe already gone. The domesticity was the strangest part, not the danger, not the constant awareness of the threat hovering somewhere in the shadows, but the small, ordinary moments that felt anything but ordinary. Heiress folding her laundry, Riona stealing his coffee when hers went cold. The way they moved around each other in the kitchen, a careful dance of proximity and distance, always aware, always careful not to touch. Except when they did touch. Those moments were electric. His hand on her lower back guiding her through a door. Her fingers brushing his when he handed her coffee. The time she tripped over absolutely nothing and he caught her, arm around her waist, pulling her against his chest for 3 heartbeats before releasing her like she'd burned him. Every touch was a spark. Every look was a conversation. And neither of them knew how to make the first move without setting everything on fire. One weekend, Riona woke up at 3 a.m. to use the bathroom. She stumbled through the dark apartment, half asleep, and noticed the couch was empty. Heiress wasn't there.
Her heart jumped.
Heiress, she called quietly. No answer. Panic fluttered in her chest. She moved through the apartment, checking the kitchen, the guest room he never used, the balcony. Empty. Heiress. A sound from outside her bedroom window. Riona's blood went cold. She grabbed the nearest weapon, a heavy bookend from her nightstand, and crept toward the window. A shadow moved on her balcony. Riona's hands shook as she reached for the curtain. Then the shadow shifted into the light. Heiress. Relief flooded through her so fast it made her dizzy. She yanked open the balcony door. What are you doing out here? You scared me half to death.
Heiress turned.
His eyes were glowing. Not reflecting light. Glowing. Amber and bright, and definitely not human. Riona froze. I'm doing a perimeter check, Heiress said, voice rough. Go back to bed. But Riona couldn't move. Couldn't look away from his eyes. Heiress, your eyes. He closed them immediately. When he opened them again, they were normal. Storm gray. Human. You're seeing things. You're tired. Go back to bed. I'm not.
Riona.
Please. There was something in his voice. Desperation.
Fear.
The sound of a man barely holding himself together. Riona stepped back. Okay, she whispered. She went back to bed. But she didn't sleep. Because she'd seen it. Whatever Heiress was hiding, whatever he'd been protecting her from for 9 months, was bigger than a confession of love. It was something impossible. Something that shouldn't exist. And Riona was running out of time to figure out what it was before it destroyed them both. 2 days later, everything came crashing down. Riona woke up at 2 a.m. to the sound of breaking glass. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Heiress, she called, voice shaking. No answer. She threw off the covers and stumbled out of bed, legs unsteady, mind racing. The living room was dark. The window was shattered. Glass glittered on the floor like diamonds. And there was blood, drops of it, leading toward the door. Heiress, Riona screamed. Silence. She ran through the apartment, checking every room, panic clawing up her throat. Empty. He was gone. Riona's hands shook as she grabbed her phone. Then she saw it. A note on the kitchen counter. Written in jagged, angry handwriting that definitely wasn't Heiress's. If you want him back, come alone. You have 1 hour. The address is below. If you call anyone, he dies. Riona's world tilted. Someone had taken Heiress. Someone had taken the man who'd spent 8 years loving her from the shadows. The man who'd confessed everything. The man who'd been keeping her safe. And now he was gone. Taken because of her. Riona stared at the note, tears burning her eyes, and made a decision. She wasn't calling the police. She wasn't calling her father. She was going after him. Alone. Because Heiress had spent 8 years protecting her. And now it was her turn to protect him. Even if it killed her. Before we continue, drop a comment below and tell us. Would you go after Heiress alone? Or would you call the police? Also, let us know what country you're watching from. We love seeing our global audience. And if you haven't subscribed yet, honestly, what are you waiting for? Hit that button now so you don't miss what happens next. Trust me, you'll regret it if you don't.
Chapter 5.
Riona didn't call the police. She didn't call her father. She grabbed a kitchen knife from the block on her counter, pulled on jeans and a hoodie with shaking hands, and got in her car. The address on the note led her to the industrial district. The part of the city where buildings went to die. Broken windows. Graffiti-covered walls. Streets so empty, they felt apocalyptic. Riona's hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel. Every rational part of her brain was screaming at her to turn around. To call for help. To do literally anything except drive alone into obvious danger with nothing but a kitchen knife and desperation. But Heiress was in trouble. And Riona would burn the world down before she let anyone hurt him. The warehouse loomed ahead. Massive and dark, windows shattered, metal door hanging off its hinges. Riona parked and sat there for a moment, trying to steady her breathing. She could still turn back. She could still call her father, unleash his army of security, do this the smart way. But the note had been clear. If you call anyone, he dies. Riona grabbed the knife and got out of the car. The night air was cold.
Silent.
The kind of silence that felt heavy, like the world was holding its breath. She walked toward the warehouse, every nerve ending on fire, every instinct screaming danger. The door creaked when she pushed it open. Inside was darkness. Complete. Suffocating. The kind of dark that made you question whether you still had eyes. Hello. Riona's voice came out smaller than she wanted. I'm here. I came alone, like you said. Silence. Then, from somewhere deep in the warehouse, a sound. Low. rumbling, animalistic.
A growl.
Riona's blood turned to ice. That wasn't human. She took a step forward, knife raised, hands shaking so badly she could barely hold it. "Heiress," she called. "Heiress, are you here?" The growl came again. Closer this time. Then lights flooded the space. Riona threw her arm up, blinded, blinking against the sudden brightness. When her vision cleared, she saw him.
Heiress.
Her heart lurched. He was on his knees in the center of the warehouse, chained to a metal support beam. Thick chains wrapped around his wrists, his chest, his throat. Blood streaked his face, his arms, his bare torso. His shirt was gone, torn away, and she could see fresh wounds, deep gashes across his ribs, his shoulders, like something with claws had tried to fillet him. But it was his eyes that made Riona's world tilt. They were glowing, not reflecting the light, glowing from within. Amber and bright and absolutely, impossibly not human. "Heiress," Riona breathed, taking a step toward him. "Stop right there, sweetheart." Riona froze. A man stepped out of the shadows.
Tall.
Maybe 6'3". Blonde hair pulled back in a knot. Sharp features. Expensive clothes that didn't match the warehouse setting. And a smile that made Riona's skin crawl. He looked like money and violence had a baby. "Who are you?" Riona demanded, raising the knife. The man laughed. "My name is Cade. And you must be Riona Caldwell, the infamous billionaire daughter who managed to do what no one else could." He gestured toward Heiress. "Break the unbreakable alpha." Riona's mind raced. "I don't know what you're talking about."
No.
Cade circled Heiress slowly, like a shark. "He didn't tell you? 8 years of obsession, and he never mentioned what he really is." "Let him go." "Oh, I will. Eventually. After he pays for his crimes." "What crimes?" Cade's smile widened. "Falling in love with you." Riona's heart slammed against her ribs. She looked at Heiress. He was staring at her with those glowing amber eyes, jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping. There was blood on his mouth. His hands were curled into fists, and she could see something wrong with them. Something that made her brain stutter. His fingers were too long, too sharp, tipped with what looked like claws. "What did you do to him?" Riona's voice shook. "I didn't do anything. This is what he is." Cade crouched down, grabbed Heiress by the hair, and yanked his head back. "Show her, Alpha. Show her what you've been hiding." Heiress's eyes locked on Riona's. And for the first time since she'd met him, she saw pure, undiluted fear. Not of Cade. Not of the chains. Not of whatever was about to happen. Of her reaction. "Riona," he said, voice rough and broken.
Run.
"Get out of here. Please. I'm not leaving you. You don't understand. I don't care. I'm not leaving."
Cade laughed.
"How sweet. She thinks she can save you." He released Heiress's hair and stood up. "You really didn't tell her, did you? You've been playing human this whole time. Pretending. Lying." "Shut up," Heiress growled. "Does she know you've been watching her for 8 years? Stalking her like prey? Does she know what you dream about doing to her when the moon is full and the wolf is clawing at your skin?"
Shut
up. Cade kicked Heiress in the ribs. The sound of boot meeting flesh echoed through the warehouse. Riona screamed. "Stop." She ran toward them. Cade moved faster than should be possible. 1 second he was standing over Heiress, the next he was in front of Riona, hand wrapped around her throat, lifting her off the ground. Riona gasped, clawing at his hand, knife falling from her grip. And Heiress went feral. The sound that came out of him wasn't human. It was a roar that shook the building, primal and furious and absolutely terrifying. The chains groaned. Cade looked back at Heiress, still holding Riona by the throat. There he is.
The beast.
Want to know what he's capable of, sweetheart? Want to see what your precious bodyguard really is? Cade threw Riona to the ground. She hit hard, pain exploding through her shoulder, gasping for air. Then Cade walked back to Heiress and released the chains. "Show her," he said, "or I'll kill her right now." Heiress looked at Riona. and she saw agony in his eyes. The look of a man being forced to choose between revealing his darkest secret and watching someone die. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Then he shifted. It happened fast. Bones cracked with sounds like gunshots. Heiress screamed, a sound that morphed mid-cry into something inhuman. His body convulsed, spine arching, muscles rippling and reshaping under his skin. Fur erupted across his body, black and thick. His face elongated, jaw extending, teeth sharpening into fangs. His hands twisted into massive paws tipped with claws that could shred steel. In seconds, Heiress wasn't a man anymore. He was a wolf. Massive. The size of a small car. Black fur with silver streaks. Amber eyes still glowing, still intelligent, still painfully, impossibly Heiress. Riona couldn't breathe.
Couldn't think.
Couldn't process what she was seeing. Werewolves. Werewolves were real. They existed. And Heiress was one of them. The wolf, Heiress, stared at her. And in his eyes, she saw everything.
Pain. Shame. Fear.
Longing. He was still him. Still the man who'd loved her for 8 years. Still the man who'd confessed everything. Still the man who'd been protecting her with a desperation that bordered on worship. Just not human. Beautiful, isn't he? Cade's voice cut through her shock. The alpha who fell in love with a human. Pathetic. Against every law we have. Against nature itself. Riona couldn't look away from Heiress. From the wolf. From the creature that shouldn't exist, but was staring at her like she was his entire world. He broke pack law when he fell for you. Cade continued, circling them both. Alphas don't mate with humans. We don't risk exposure. We don't compromise the pack for fleeting human obsession. But Heiress? He laughed. Heiress has been obsessed with you for 8 years. Watching you. Following you. Dreaming about claiming you.
And now?
He has to pay. The wolf snarled, lips pulling back to reveal fangs that could tear through bone. Cade just smiled. Here's how this works, Riona Caldwell. You have 2 choices. 1. Walk away. Forget you ever saw this. Forget Heiress exists. And I'll make his death quick.
No, Riona whispered.
2. Join the pack. Become mine. Submit to me. And I'll let him live. He'll be exiled, broken, stripped of his alpha status, but alive. The wolf lunged. The chains were gone, but Cade moved faster, dodging, slamming his fist into the wolf's side hard enough to send him crashing into the wall. Heiress yelped, a sound that tore through Riona's chest. She scrambled to her feet. Stop. Stop hurting him. Cade turned to her. Then choose. The wolf struggled to stand, legs shaking, blood matting his fur. Riona looked at him. At Heiress. At the creature he was and the man he'd always been. And she understood. He'd been carrying this secret for 8 years. Loving her while knowing she could never know what he was. Protecting her while fighting his own nature. Bleeding in the shadows so she could sleep safely. He'd given her everything. And asked for nothing. Fine. Riona said, voice steady despite the terror coursing through her. I'll do it. I'll join your pack. I'll do whatever you want. Just let him go.
No.
The word ripped from Heiress's throat, half human, half wolf, completely anguished. He shifted back. The transformation was faster this time. Bones cracking, fur receding, until Heiress was kneeling on the concrete floor, naked and bloody and barely conscious. Riona, no, he gasped. Don't
do this.
I'm not letting you die. You don't understand what you're agreeing to. I don't care.
Heiress tried to stand, collapsed. Please.
Please don't do this. I'm not worth it. Riona dropped to her knees in front of him, hands cupping his face, forcing him to look at her. You've been protecting me for 8 years. You've bled for me. You've loved me when I didn't even know you existed. So yes, Heiress. You're worth it. Tears streaked through the blood on his face. If you do this, you're bound to him forever. You'll never be free. Then we'll figure it out together. Riona. She kissed him, hard and desperate and full of everything she couldn't say. When she pulled back, Reese was staring at her like she'd just destroyed and remade his entire world. "I love you," she whispered. "Whatever you are, whatever this is, I love you." Reese let out a sound between a laugh and a sob. Cade was a liar. The moment Riona agreed to his terms, the moment she said she'd join his pact to save Reese, Cade threw his head back and laughed. Chapter 6. It was a cold, cruel sound that echoed through the warehouse like broken glass. "Did you really think I'd let him go?" Cade snapped his fingers. "He's a traitor. And traitors die." 6 wolves emerged from the shadows. Massive,
Snarling.
eyes glowing in the darkness like demons summoned from hell. They circled Reese where he knelt, still in human form, still bleeding, still chained by silver that burned his skin and kept him weak. Riona's heart stopped. "You said if I agreed."
Elite.
Cade's smile was all teeth. "Did you really think a human had any bargaining power here? You're nothing. He's nothing. And after tonight, you'll both be forgotten." The wolves moved closer, snapping jaws, clicking claws on concrete. The sound of predators closing in for the kill. Riona looked at Reese. He was staring at the ground, chest heaving, body trembling from pain and exhaust. Tyan and the effort of holding his wolf back. Then he lifted his head, and his eyes met hers. Something passed between them in that moment. Understanding. Acceptance. 1,000 unspoken words compressed into a single look. Reese shifted, not into the wolf, back to human. The transformation was agonizing. She could see it in the way his body convulsed, in the sound that tore from his throat. But he forced himself back into his human skin, naked and bloody and barely able to stand. The silver chains fell away. They'd only worked on his wolf form. Reese stood slowly, swaying on his feet, and Riona saw his eyes. Furious, burning with a rage so pure and primal it made the air around him shimmer. He looked at Cade and growled, a sound that was entirely wolf despite his human throat. "You want me? Fine. But you touch her, and I'll rip your throat out with my bare hands." Cade's smile widened. "There he is. The alpha I remember. The one who used to lead our pack before he got soft. Before he fell for a human and forgot what he was." "I didn't forget." Reese took a step forward. His legs shook, but held. "I just found something worth more than your psychotic power games." "How romantic." Cade gestured to the circling wolves. "Kill him. Make it slow." The wolves lunged. Riona screamed. Reese shifted mid-leap. The transformation was instantaneous. 1 second he was a man, the next he was a massive black wolf with silver-streaked fur and eyes that burned like hellfire. He met the first wolf in midair with an impact that sounded like thunder. They went down in a tangle of teeth and claws and violence. Riona stumbled backward, heart slamming against her ribs, unable to look away. The fight was brutal. 6 against 1. The wolves tore into Reese with coordinated precision. They'd fought together before, trained together. They knew how to bring down an alpha, but Reese fought like a man with nothing left to lose. He was faster, stronger, every movement precise and lethal. When he bit, bones broke. When his claws struck, flesh tore. He moved through them like a hurricane through paper houses. But there were too many. For every wolf he threw off, 2 more took its place. Blood sprayed across concrete.
His blood. Theirs.
Impossible to tell the difference. Riona watched him start to slow, start to stumble, start to lose. And she made a decision. She ran. Not away from him. Never away from him. She ran toward the warehouse entrance, toward her car parked in the shadows, toward the phone in her pocket and the one person who had the power to end this. Her father. Riona's hands shook as she pulled out her phone, fingers slipping on the screen, breath coming in ragged gasps. She hit his contact. It rang once. "Riona." Victor Caldwell's voice was sharp. Alert. He'd been awake. "It's 3 a.m. "What's wrong?" "Dad." Her voice cracked. "I need backup."
Now. Armed.
"Dangerous. I need everything you have." Where are you? She gave him the address, words tumbling out too fast. There are men here. They took Reese. They're trying to kill him. Dad, please, I'm 10 minutes out. His voice went cold.
Deadly.
The voice of a man who'd built an empire on calculated violence. If anyone touches you, they're already dead. Hold on. The line went dead. Riona shoved the phone in her pocket and ran back into the warehouse. The scene had gotten worse. Reese was on the ground now, wolf form barely moving, surrounded by 5 wolves that looked far less damaged than he did. The 6th lay motionless in a pool of blood 20 feet away. Cade stood watching with his arms crossed, smiling like he was at a sporting event. Finish it, he called out. The wolves moved in for the kill. Riona didn't think. She just grabbed a piece of broken metal pipe from the debris scattered around the warehouse and ran screaming into the middle of it. Get away from him. She swung the pipe, connected with the nearest wolf's skull with a sickening crack. The wolf yelped and stumbled back. For sets of glowing eyes turned toward her. Riona's blood turned to ice. She'd made a terrible mistake. The wolves advanced. Reese moved. Despite his injuries, despite the blood loss, despite barely being conscious. He was on his feet, and between Riona and the wolves in a heartbeat. He snarled, a sound so vicious it made the warehouse walls vibrate. The wolves hesitated, because they remembered who Reese had been before Cade had taken over. Remembered the alpha who'd led their pack with strength and honor. Remembered that even wounded and outnumbered, he was still the most dangerous thing in the room. Stand down, Reese growled. Half wolf, half human, the words distorted but unmistakable. One of the wolves whined and took a step back. I said kill them, Cade shouted. But the wolves didn't move. Cade's face twisted with rage.
Fine.
I'll do it myself. He shifted. The transformation was different from Reese's. Violent. Aggressive. His wolf form was larger than the others, gray and scarred, with eyes that glowed red instead of amber. He launched himself at Reese. They collided with the force of a car crash. Riona was thrown backward by the impact, hitting the ground hard, pain exploding through her shoulder. When she looked up, Reese and Cade were locked in combat. This wasn't like the fight with the other wolves. This was personal, brutal. 2 alphas fighting for dominance, for survival, for the right to protect what they loved. They moved too fast to follow. Blurs of black and gray. The sound of snapping jaws and tearing flesh. The wet crack of bones breaking. Blood pooled on the concrete. Reese was losing. He was already wounded, already exhausted, and Cade was fresh and larger, and fighting with the kind of ruthless efficiency that came from years of pack politics and power struggles. Cade got his jaws around Reese's throat. Riona screamed. Reese twisted, claws raking across Cade's face, and broke free. But not before Cade's teeth had torn through fur and flesh. Blood poured from Reese's neck. Too much blood. He staggered, legs shaking, barely able to stand. Cade circled him slowly, confidently, knowing he'd won. Any last words, Alpha? Reese shifted back to human. Naked. Bloody. Hand pressed to the wound on his neck, trying to stop the bleeding. But his eyes were clear. Focused. He looked past Cade. Straight at Riona.
And smiled.
Yeah, he said, voice rough and wet. Duck. Cade frowned. Then the warehouse doors exploded open. Not opened. Exploded. The metal doors flew off their hinges with the force of the breaching charge, crashing to the ground with a sound like the end of the world. Victor Caldwell walked through the smoke and debris, with 20 armed guards in tactical gear. He surveyed the scene with cold, calculating eyes. The wolves.
The blood.
His daughter on the ground. His bodyguard bleeding out in the center of it all. Get away from my daughter's bodyguard, he said quietly. The quiet was somehow more terrifying than if he'd shouted.
Cade shifted back to human.
You don't understand what's happening here. I understand perfectly. Victor's hand moved to the gun at his hip. You kidnapped my employee. You threatened my daughter. And now you're going to die. The guards raised their weapons. Cade's eyes widened. Then he shifted and ran. "Shoot him," Victor said flatly. The guards opened fire. The sound was deafening. Bullets tore through the space where Cade had been, hitting concrete and metal, throwing up sparks and debris. Cade made it to a broken window and leaped through. The other wolves scattered, disappearing into the shadows before the guards could track them. Victor didn't chase them. He walked straight to Riona, dropped to one knee, and pulled her against his chest. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine. But Reese." Victor was already moving. He knelt next to Reese, who was on the ground now, consciousness fading, hand still pressed to his bleeding neck. "Stay with me," Victor said, voice sharp with command. He looked at his guards. "Medic."
Now.
2 guards rushed forward with a medical kit. Riona crawled over, ignoring the pain in her shoulder, and took Reese's free hand. His eyes fluttered open. "Found hers." "You came back," he whispered. "Of course I came back, you idiot." Tears streamed down her face. "I love you too." Reese's lips curved into the smallest smile. "Took you long enough to say it." Despite everything, the blood, the fear, the chaos, Riona laughed. "You're really choosing now to develop a sense of humor? Better late than never." The medic was working on his neck, applying pressure, wrapping gauze, but Reese didn't take his eyes off Riona. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for not telling you, for lying about what I am." "Shut up." Riona squeezed his hand. "You're not allowed to apologize right now. You're not allowed to do anything except stay alive." "Bossy. You have no idea." Victor stood up, phone already to his ear. "I need a medical team at this location. Full trauma unit. Discreet.
No hospitals.
No questions. Yes, I know what time it is. Make it happen." He ended the call and looked down at Reese. "You saved my daughter's life." Reese met his eyes. "I'd do it again." "I know." Something that might have been respect flickered across Victor's face. "Which is why you're fired." Riona's head snapped up. "What?" "Fired as her bodyguard," Victor clarified. "Because bodyguards maintain professional distance. And it's clear that ship has sailed." He looked at Riona. "If you want him in your life, that's your choice. But not as an employee.
As."
He gestured vaguely at the carnage around them. "Whatever this is." Riona stared at her father. In all her years, she'd never seen him accept something outside his control. Never seen him bend his rules. Never seen him show anything resembling approval for chaos. But he was looking at Reese like he understood. Like he recognized what it meant to love someone enough to burn the world down for them. "Thank you," Riona whispered. Victor nodded once. Then he turned to his guards. "Secure the perimeter. Make sure those things don't come back. And someone get my daughter a blanket. She's in shock."
Things.
He'd seen the wolves. Seen the impossible. And he was processing it the way Victor Caldwell processed everything, with cold pragmatism and immediate action. The medical team arrived 12 minutes later. They stabilized Reese, loaded him onto a stretcher, and transported him to a private facility Victor owned. The kind of place that treated gunshot wounds without reporting them and asked exactly 0 questions. Riona refused to leave his side. She sat in the back of the ambulance, holding Reese's hand, watching the medics work, and making silent promises. She'd figure out what it meant that werewolves were real. She'd deal with Cade and his pack and whatever threat they still posed. She'd learn everything about Reese's world, his past, the secrets he'd been carrying. But first she was going to make sure he survived. Because she'd just gotten him. And she wasn't letting him go. Not for anything. Not ever. Reese's fingers tightened around hers. His eyes opened, glowing faintly amber in the dim ambulance lights. "Still here?" he rasped. "Always," Riona said fiercely. "You're stuck with me now." "Good." He closed his eyes. And for the first time since the warehouse, Riona let herself breathe. They'd made it out. Bloody. Broken. Changed forever. But together. And that was all that mattered. Chapter 7. Reese woke up 3 days later in Riona's guest room. Every inch of his body hurt. Not the sharp, Immediate pain of fresh wounds. This was deeper. The kind of pain that lived in muscles and bones, the aftermath of a body pushed past its breaking point and forced to put itself back together. But he was alive. That fact hit him slowly, like waking from a dream he wasn't sure he'd survive. He blinked at the ceiling, trying to orient himself.
Soft sheets. Clean air.
Sunlight filtering through curtains. Not the warehouse. Not dying on cold concrete. Safe. He turned his head and his chest tightened so hard he forgot how to breathe. Riona was asleep in a chair next to his bed, body curled awkwardly, head resting on her arms, hand wrapped around as like she was afraid if she let go, he'd disappear. She'd stayed. After seeing what he was. After watching him shift into a monster. After everything. She'd stayed. Rhys tried to sit up. Pain exploded through his ribs, and he failed spectacularly, collapsing back against the pillows with a groan he couldn't suppress. Riona's eyes flew open. For a second, she just stared at him, like her brain was struggling to process that he was awake and conscious and looking at her. Then she launched herself at him. Rhys. She wrapped her arms around his neck, careful of his injuries, but desperate in a way that made his heart crack open. Rhys froze. Then, slowly, like he was afraid she might vanish if he moved too fast, he wrapped his arms around her and buried his face in her hair. She smelled like coffee and exhaustion and home. "I thought I lost you," she whispered against his shoulder. "You didn't. You stopped breathing in the ambulance."
Twice.
"Your heart stopped." They had to. Her voice broke. "Don't ever do that again." "I can't promise that." She pulled back, and Rhys saw tears streaming down her face. Real tears. For him. Because of him. "Rhys. I'll always protect you, Riona, even if it kills me. That's not changing." She cupped his face with both hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "Then we protect each other. Deal?" Rhys stared at her. This woman who'd seen him at his absolute worst. Who'd watched him transform into a creature that shouldn't exist. Who'd had every reason to run and instead had stayed. Had fought for him. Had told her father to bring an army. Had said she loved him. "Deal," he whispered. Then he kissed her. It wasn't like the first kiss in the warehouse, desperate and terrified and tasting like goodbye. This was soft. Careful. A promise instead of a plea. Everything he'd been holding back for 8 years poured into that kiss. Every moment of longing. Every night spent watching her from a distance. Every time he'd wanted to touch her and forced himself not to. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Riona's eyes were bright with tears and something else.
Joy.
8 years, huh? She said, voice shaking. Rhys smiled. Actually smiled. The real thing, not the ghost of one he'd given her before. 8 years. Why didn't you say anything? The question hung between them. Rhys looked down at his hands. At the scars crisscrossing his knuckles, his forearms. Evidence of violence and survival and a life she'd never had to live. Because you deserve better than a monster. The slap wasn't hard, but it was unexpected. Riona smacked his chest, glaring at him through her tears. "Don't you dare. Don't you dare call yourself that. Riona, you're not a monster. You're a man who turned into a giant wolf to save my life. You fought 6 wolves while bleeding out because you wouldn't let them touch me. She laughed, watery and broken and beautiful. "You're actually kinda hot when you go all protective alpha." Rhys stared at her. Then he laughed. A real, genuine laugh that came from somewhere deep in his chest and felt like the first breath after drowning. Riona's face lit up. "There it is." "What?" "Your laugh. Your real laugh. I was starting to think you'd forgotten how." Rhys pulled her close, ignoring the protest from his ribs, needing her closer than physically possible. "I've been smiling on the inside for 8 years, he said quietly. "Every time you walked into a room. Every time you laughed at something stupid. Every time you did that thing where you bite your lip when you're thinking. I've been yours for 8 years, Riona. I just didn't know how to tell you." She pulled back to look at him, and Reese saw his entire future in her eyes. Well, now you get to smile on the outside. Because I'm not going anywhere. You're stuck with me. Monster wolf form and all. I'm a werewolf. I know. There are things you don't understand yet. About my world. About what it means that you've seen me shift. About the danger you're in just by being with me. Then teach me. She said it simply, like it was the easiest thing in the world. We'll figure out together. Reese closed his eyes. For the first time in his life, for the first time since he was a teenager bitten by something that shouldn't exist and turned into a creature caught between two worlds, he wasn't alone. Okay, he whispered. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Riona kissed him again, soft and sweet, and Reese let himself believe it. Believe that maybe, just maybe, he could have this. Have her. Have a future that didn't end with him bleeding out alone because he'd loved someone he couldn't have. When she finally pulled away, there was mischief in her eyes.
So.
Werewolf. Does that mean you have super strength? Super speed? Can you hear my heartbeat right now? Reese's lips twitched. Yes, yes, and yes. It's racing, by the way. That's because you're shirtless and in my guest bed and looking at me like that. Like what? Like I'm the only thing in the world that matters. Reese reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture achingly gentle. That's because you are. Riona's breath caught, and Reese realized something that should have terrified him but instead felt like coming home. He was done hiding, done pretending, done holding back. For 8 years, he'd loved her in silence. Now he was going to love her out loud. And nothing. Not Cade, not the pack, not the danger that came with his world, was going to stop him. I love you, he said.
Clear. Certain. No hesitation.
Riona's eyes filled with tears again. I love you too. Even though you're a werewolf. Even though you've been stalking me for 8 years like some kind of supernatural creep. I prefer the term protective observation. You're ridiculous. You love me anyway. Unfortunately. She kissed him again. And Reese held the woman he'd loved for 8 years and finally let himself believe in happy endings. Even for monsters. Especially for monsters who'd found someone brave enough to love them back. Chapter 8. But Cade wasn't finished. 2 weeks after Reese woke up in Riona's guest room, after the stitches and the healing and the careful conversations about what it meant that werewolves were real, Cade came back. The message arrived at dawn. Not a text. Not a phone call. A severed wolf's had left on Riona's doorstep with a note pinned to its ear. Neutral ground. Sunset. Come alone or she dies screaming. Reese found it before Riona woke up. He stood there on her doorstep, staring at the head of a young wolf he'd known from his old pack, and felt something dark and ancient rise in his chest. Cade had declared war. Not just on him. On everything he loved. By the time Riona emerged from her bedroom, Reese had already cleaned up the Evie Denke and made his decision. She found him in the kitchen, fully dressed in tactical gear, weapons laid out on the counter. What's happening? She asked immediately, reading the tension in his shoulders. Cade's challenging me. Tonight. Neutral ground. Riona's face went pale. What does that mean? It means he's brought the entire pack. It means this ends one way or another. Reese didn't look at her. Couldn't. It means I have to go. Then I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. Reese.
No.
He turned to face her, and the look in his eyes was fierce. Final. This is pack business. Wolf law. You're human. You can't be there. I don't care about wolf law. Riona, if you're there and something goes wrong, they'll kill you just to hurt me. I can't. I won't let that happen. She crossed the space between them in 3 strides and grabbed his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. You don't get to decide that. You don't get to protect me by shutting me out. It's too dangerous. I don't care. Riona. We protect each other, remember? That was the deal. So either we go together or you tie me up and lock me in a closet. And even then, I'll find a way to follow you. Reese closed his eyes. He'd never loved her more than in that moment. Never wanted to wrap her in his arms and never let go. Never been more terrified of losing her. If something happens to you, he said quietly, I won't survive it. Do you understand? I've spent 8 years loving you from a distance. 2 weeks loving you up close. And I'm not ready to lose you. Then don't lose. She kissed him, hard and desperate.
When?
Come back to me, and let me be there when you do. Reese opened his eyes, and made a decision that went against every instinct screaming in his head. Okay, but you stay behind me. You don't engage. And if I tell you to run, you run.
No arguments. Deal.
They told Victor Caldwell. He offered to send his private army. 50 men. Weapons. Air support. Reese refused. This is pack business, he said, standing in Victor's office with Riona at his side. If I show up with human backup, I lose any claim to leadership. The pack will never accept me. This has to be wolf against wolf. Victor studied him with those cold, calculating eyes that had built empires and crushed enemies. You're walking into a massacre. Maybe. You'll be outnumbered 50-1. Probably. And you're taking my daughter into that? She insisted. Victor's gaze shifted to Riona. Something flickered across his face. Not quite approval, but close. You're sure about this? Riona lifted her chin. Yes. Then go. Victor stood, walked to a cabinet, and pulled out a silver case. He opened it to reveal a handgun. Silver bullets. Won't kill a werewolf, but it'll hurt like hell and slow them down. Take it. Reese accepted the weapon. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just bring her back alive. They arrived at neutral ground at sunset. The location was an abandoned quarry 40 miles outside the city.
Requittera.
No cover. Nowhere to hide. Perfect for a challenge. Cade was waiting, and he'd brought the entire pack. 50 wolves in human form, standing in a semicircle around the quarry floor.
Silent.
Watching. Waiting to see if their former alpha still had what it took to lead. Cade stood in the center, arms crossed, smiling like he'd already won. You came, he called out as Reese and Riona approached. And you brought your pet human. How touching. Reese didn't respond. Just kept walking until he stood 20 feet from Cade, Riona slightly behind him. This is pack law, Reese said, voice carrying across the quarry. A challenge for Alpha. 1-on-1. To the death or submission. Agreed. Cade's smile widened. Agreed. Though I should warn you, I don't accept submission. Neither do I. Reese turned to Riona. She was pale but steady, hands clenched at her sides, eyes fierce. Stay here, he said quietly. No matter what happens. Stay here. Reese. He kissed her. Hard and desperate and full of everything he couldn't say. When he pulled back, she had tears in her eyes. Come back to me. Always. Then he walked to the center of the quarry. Cade was already shifting. The transformation was violent. Aggressive. Bones cracking, fur erupting, until Cade stood as a massive gray wolf with red eyes and scars that told stories of violence and survival. Reese shifted. The transformation felt different this time. Not desperate. Not terrified. Controlled. He felt every bone realign, every muscle reform, every sense sharpen until the world came into focus with crystalline clarity. When he stood as a wolf, black fur with silver streaks, amber eyes burning, the pack murmured, because they remembered. Remembered the alpha he'd been before Cade had taken over through violence and intimidation. Remembered strength.
Honor.
Leadership that didn't require fear. Cade lunged first. They met in the center with an impact that shook the ground. The fight was brutal. Cade was larger, heavier, fighting with the ruthless efficiency of someone who'd clawed his way to power and held it through blood. But Reese was faster. Smarter. Fighting with the desperate fury of a man protecting the only thing in the world that mattered. They tore into each other with fangs and claws, moving too fast for human eyes to follow. Blood spraying across rock, the sound of snarls and snapping jaws echoing through the quarry. Riona watched, heart in her throat, hands pressed to her mouth to keep from screaming. She saw Heiress take a hit that should have crippled him. Saw him shake it off and keep fighting. Saw him get his jaws around Cade's throat. Saw Cade twist free, claws raking across Heiress's side, tearing through fur and flesh. The fight went on for what felt like hours, but was probably minutes. Both wolves bleeding. Both exhausted. Both refusing to give up. Then Heiress made his move. He feinted left, Cade followed, and Heiress used the momentum to flip him onto his back. Before Cade could recover, Heiress had his jaws locked around his throat. Not biting down. Not yet. Just holding him there.
Pinned.
Defeated. The quarry went silent. Cade shifted back to human, gasping for air, Heiress's wolf jaws still at his throat. Submit, Heiress growled. The word was distorted, half-wolf, but unmistakable. Cade's eyes blazed with hatred. Never.
Then die.
Heiress's jaws started to close. Wait. One of the pack members stepped forward. An older wolf, scarred and gray. He's beaten. The challenge is won. You don't have to kill him. Heiress's eyes shifted to the older wolf. He killed pack members. He broke wolf law. He threatened my mate. The word hung in the air.
Mate.
The pack stirred, murmurs rippling through them. Because mate bonds were sacred. Unbreakable. The highest law. If you kill him, the older wolf said carefully, you're no better than him. If you spare him, you prove you're the alpha we need. Heiress held Cade's throat for another long moment. Then he released him, stepped back, shifted to human, stood naked and bloody and absolutely dominant in the center of the quarry. You're exiled, he said to Cade. Leave pack territory. If you ever come back, if you ever threaten her again, I'll kill you.
No merci.
No second chances. Do you understand? Cade coughed, clutching his throat. This isn't over.
Yes.
It is. Heiress turned his back on him, the ultimate show of dominance, and walked toward Riona. The pack watched in silence. Then one by one, they dropped to their knees, submitting to their new alpha. Riona ran to Heiress, throwing her arms around him, not caring about the blood or the nudity or the 50 werewolves watching. It's over, she whispered. It's over, he confirmed, holding her like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to the earth. She kissed him, and the pack howled. Not in challenge. In celebration. Their alpha had returned, and he'd brought his mate home. 6 months later, Riona moved into Heiress's cabin in the mountains. Not because she had to. Her father had made it very clear she could stay in the city, maintain her life, keep her distance from the supernatural chaos. But she wanted this. Wanted him. Wanted the life they were building together, far from the politics and violence of pack dynamics. The cabin was perfect. Isolated. Surrounded by forest and mountains and a silence that felt like healing. They spent their days hiking trails only Heiress knew, cooking meals together in a kitchen that had never seen so much laughter, learning each other in ways that went deeper than physical. And their nights? Well, that was between them. One evening, as the sun set over the mountains painting everything gold and amber, Riona sat on the porch with Heiress, his arm around her shoulders, her head on his chest. Do you ever regret it? She asked quietly. Falling for a human? All the complications that came with it. Heiress pulled her into his lap, settling her against him like she belonged there. Like she'd always belonged there. Never. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. Even though I can't shift? Even though I'll never fully understand your world. Especially because of that. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone. You're brave without claws. Strong without fangs. You faced down a pack of werewolves armed with nothing but a kitchen knife and sheer stubbornness. You're everything, Riona. Everything I never knew I needed. Tears pricked her eyes. I love you, Heiress Kale. I love you more. Not possible. We'll argue about it later. She kissed him as the sun disappeared behind the mountains and the first stars emerged. And Heiress held the woman he'd loved for 8 years, the woman who'd seen him at his worst and stayed anyway, the woman who'd chosen him despite everything. He finally felt at peace. Because sometimes the quietest love is the loudest. Sometimes the monster gets the girl. And sometimes 8 years of silent devotion leads to a lifetime of spoken promises. If you made it this far, you're part of something special. Drop a comment and let us know what you thought. Did Reese and Riona's story touch you? Where are you watching from? And if you still haven't subscribed to Gracie Werewolf Story Bank, seriously, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join our pack. More stories like this are coming. See you in the next one.